Welcome everybody to this high-level launch event of the OECD Voluntary Transparency Reporting Framework, a portal for standardized transparency reports from online content sharing services about their policies and actions on terrorist and violent extremist content, or as we call it, TVEC, TVEC online. To open our session, I'd like to invite OECD Secretary General, Mr. Matthias Cormann, to deliver opening remarks. Please.
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, colleagues, friends all, thank you for joining us today for the launch of the OECD Voluntary Transparency Reporting Framework. The deepening and accelerating digital transformation of our economies and our societies brings many obvious benefits and opportunities. But it also comes with a series of associated and often growing risks, challenges, and disruptions. I'm proud of the work of the OECD aimed at tackling one of those challenges which has already had devastating impacts on people's security and well-being. In 2019, the world was shocked by the absolutely horrific terrorist attacks in Christchurch, New Zealand, live streamed and uploaded online for viewing. That terrible and devastating tragedy shook the world into action. The G7, the G20, our members here at the OECD were all united in calling for strong and effective action to combat the spread of terrorist and violent extremist content across online platforms. Indeed, OECD research in 2020 revealed that only 5 of the 50 largest online content sharing services were issuing transparency reports that specifically covered terrorist and violent extremist content. And of those 5 content sharing services which did report, each went about it differently, using different metrics, different methodologies, and reporting with different frequencies. The increased transparency about how illegal content is dealt with is a very important part of making the digital environment a safer place. A lack of reporting and the lack of comparability and consistent standards have been critical barriers to understanding the strengths and the gaps in efforts to counter the spread of terrorist and violent extremist content online. As a platform for submitting and accessing standardized transparency reports, this framework seeks to improve transparency and accountability on the sharing of information about issues being confronted and the experiences about how best to address them. There had been an emerging level of regulatory fragmentation which was frustrating efforts to counter this issue as effectively as possible. The need to comply with diverging requirements would lead to companies issuing different versions of their reports according to different jurisdictional requirements. For smaller platforms, diverse reports across different jurisdictions would create a significant and costly hurdle. And at the same time, it was some of these smaller platforms that were shown to be increasingly targeted by terrorist and violent extremists. Engagement with a wide range of stakeholders and experts was therefore key to the successful design of this framework. The framework we're launching today was developed through extensive multi-stakeholder consultations and collaboration involving more than 100 leading experts from government, digital service providers, civil society and academia. I would like to thank all participants most sincerely for contributing their expertise and for their valuable contributions to ensure that this framework can help address these diverging regulatory approaches and to optimize our response to this issue. It's great to see how this framework has already secured broad support, including the endorsement from all of our 38 OECD member countries. This framework is a concrete step forward in identifying, quantifying, and addressing the issue of harmful and illegal content online. It establishes an evidence base which enables governments and companies to design policies and practices for a safer experience online. It is a step towards bringing the international community together around common standards. And it could also serve as a model for transparency reporting on other illegal content, such as child sexual exploitative material. The OECD is committed to making the digital environment a safe place. And I commend this OECD voluntary transparency reporting framework to you. Thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you, Secretary General. Now that I have introduced Matthias Kormann, the SG here at the OECD, I can introduce myself. I'm Ulrik Knutson. I'm Deputy Secretary General here at the OECD, and I want to welcome you to 1 hour and 15 minutes of hopefully a stimulating discussion. We have a very, very distinguished panel with us today. But before I turn to them and introduce them, we have a short video presentation just to introduce you to the new VTRF portal. Video, please.
Terrorist and violent extremist groups have become increasingly proficient at using new technologies for criminal ends. They abuse online content sharing services to spread their messages, recruit members, and coordinate criminal activities, leading to numerous deadly attacks in recent years, some of them even live-streamed and largely shared online. What policies can best combat this misuse of the internet without infringing human rights, such as the freedom of expression? To answer that question, we need a solid evidence base. In response, the OECD is introducing the Voluntary Transparency Reporting Framework, an international hub for submitting and accessing standardized transparency reports on terrorist and violent extremist content online. The VTRF 1.0 is the result of the most extensive international multi-stakeholder consultation ever undertaken in this field. Through the VTRF, online content sharing services of all sizes can submit reports on TVEC by completing a standardized questionnaire. After a thorough review by OECD experts, the reports receive a seal that indicates that the report meets the OECD standard for baseline transparency. They are then easily searchable, viewable, and it is even possible to download them. The VTRF is a unique and innovative tool that can benefit society as a whole by enabling a safer, more trusted internet. Join the VTRF community today and start exploring at OECD-VTRF-pilot.org.
Thank you for that. As you know, greater transparency is key to improving the evidence base on terrorist and violent extremist content online, as well as other types of harmful content. An improved evidence base, in turn, enables more effective policies. By facilitating better transparency reporting, the VTRF has the potential to decrease the volume of TVEC online and to reduce its reach, while at the same time, as it was said, safeguarding fundamental freedoms, including the freedom of expression. Now, we have with us today, as I said, an absolutely excellent high-level panel to discuss the role of transparency reporting for reducing illegal and harmful content online while protecting human rights. And I'm very pleased to welcome Australia's ESafety Commissioner, Ms. Julie Inman-Grant, Senior Director of Public Safety in Canada Centre for Community Engagement and Prevention of Violence, Mr. Robert Burley, French Ambassador for Digital Technologies, Monsieur Henri Verdier, Korean Ambassador for Science, Technology and Innovation, Mr. Wong Ki-min, Ms. Judith Lichtenberg, Executive Director of the Global Network Initiative, and last but not least, Mr. John Redgrave, who is Vice President of Trust and Safety at Discord. I'd like to start our conversation with you, Commissioner Inman-Grant. Welcome. And not least because Australia is really the first country in the world to have established a regulatory authority dedicated to promoting online safety and protecting Australians from abuse online. In your view, Commissioner, why is better transparency needed in this domain, and where is it needed the most?
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for that mind-bending question, Deputy Secretary Knutson, right out of the gate. I mean, I think the short answer is that transparency is absolutely needed across both sectors and borders. The stakes of letting terrorism and online extremism flourish in the online domain are simply too high. And as we've seen time and again, festering online hatred can spill over into real world harms. So the only radicalism we should embrace in this domain is much more radical transparency and accountability. And no organization working in this space, including all of those who contributed to this important effort to deliver the voluntary transparency reporting framework, should be exempt. And I think we should all be very clear that our job doesn't end here. It is the implementation and constant iteration of this framework that will lead to our collective success going forward, helping to ensure that we anticipate and meet looming threats as they arise. Does that answer your question, and shall I continue?
Please continue.
Okay. Well, as Australia's ESafety Commissioner, I am the world's first independent regulator for online safety, but that is changing. My powers enable us to investigate and take action against a range of online harms, including terrorist and violent extremist content. And we have a 93% success rate in taking down content from across the globe. Some of you will recall, I also spoke at the opening meeting for this important work in Boston in 2019. Being able to speak to you again today at this launch of VTRF 1.0 is therefore a poetic book ending for me. Though, as I said before, this is far from the end of the process, but rather just the beginning for a more transparent future. Today, we celebrate a pivotal inflection point in this journey, and I think that we must also remember to pause and think about why it is so important to both individuals and society at large. As the Secretary General said, we will forever hold the inhumane live streaming of the Christchurch atrocity in 2019 as a critical turning point for collective action. This served as a tragic and alarming wake-up call about the role that the internet can play in exacerbating both the causes and the effects of violent terrorism, and how instantaneous virality could become a dangerous contagion. It highlighted the need for greater transparency and accountability by industry around how they tackle these issues. But we've also seen other forms of online extremism, like the misogynistic movement of the incels, spill over into real-world violence, with the Plymouth, England massacre late last year one example, reminding us that violent extremist misuse of the internet is both multifaceted, but also very complex. And we see the insidious and corrosive effects of the constant barrage of hate speech targeting individuals, and know that 1 in 5 young Australians have encountered hate speech online. Online hate and violent extremism is designed to dehumanize, disenfranchise, and to ultimately silence. And it causes a gradual fraying at the edges of our social cohesion, either driving individuals to despair or steering already marginalized group into the open arms of extremists who seemingly offer them acceptance and purpose. And we've all seen how adept these groups are at harnessing the power of social media to spread their beliefs to new audiences, as well as to broadcast and weaponize violent acts to further spread and promote their ideologies and recruit new followers. To reiterate some of my key messages in Boston, transparency and accountability are the hallmarks of a robust approach to online safety and are essential for building trust in the digital economy. Transparency ensures that we have a collective understanding of where there are real challenges that need greater investment, technology interventions, or legal and regulatory changes. This has become a focus within important fora such as the GIFCT and the Christchurch Call. More companies are issuing transparency reports or building transparency centers. And while these steps are very important, they are not enough. What makes the VTRF so unique and complementary to these industry-led efforts is that this product is a truly cross-sectoral effort, rather than one led exclusively by industry or by governments. There have also been pivotal legislative strides globally, including our new Online Safety Act, which took into effect this year. The Act significantly strengthens ESafety's power so that we can now formally regulate the systems and processes of online service providers. We will do this through co-regulatory but mandatory industry codes, coupled with a new legal instrument called the Basic Online Safety Expectations. The Act requires providers to report on how they are meeting these expectations, including how companies are working to proactively minimize the availability of material on their platforms that depicts, promotes, incites, or instructs in terrorist acts and other violent crimes. In line with growing expectations from the public that tech companies must prohibit their online platforms facilitating these kinds of extremist acts online, other countries are legislating too, with the UK Online Safety Bill and the EU Digital Services Act the most prominent in recent examples. ESafety already has a strong track record in removing seriously harmful content, particularly as COVID supercharged reports into our office. From 2019 to 2021, we saw a 95% increase in reports of illegal content. 87% of these reports were of child sexual abuse material, primarily hosted overseas. But my team continues to investigate material of beheadings, mutilation, torture, rape, and other crimes being carried out online. Our success rate in delivering abhorrent violent material notices against perpetrator-produced content is high, at 93% for the removal of this material, and we've already issued several successful Class 1 removal notices under the new Act. But there is no question that we must move beyond a whack-a-mole approach to more sweeping and proactive approaches like this one. And this is precisely what comprehensive efforts like the VTRF and initiatives like Safety by Design can help us to achieve, to help us get ahead of these issues. And we must continue to tackle the scourge together and at scale. The launch of the VTRF 1.0 is such an important milestone, and it is the culmination of a tremendous amount of collaboration and compromise. It provides a baseline common standard that any online content sharing service can use to provide information about its terrorist and violent extremist content related policies and actions. And this needs to be a must-do, not a nice to have, for all online service providers. So my call to action today is for all digital platforms to support this initiative and undertake reporting through the VTRF to turn this framework into meaningful action. From the initial round of reporting, we will get a deeper understanding of the secret sauce of companies, their risk management practices, investment, innovation, leadership, governance, and incident response. But it should also provide us all insight into the challenges tech companies faced, as well as the trade-offs they must make. This will give us the evidence and the experience to drive more robust changes to the framework. In closing, I do want to thank Andy Wyckoff, Audrey Plonk, and particularly Jeremy West for his stewardship, and for the entire OECD for leading this important and challenging work, as well as the OECD's Committee on Digital Economy Policy, and in particular, Australia's own delegate, Councillor Sarah Brown, who has been a champion of this project. And just to circle back to the Deputy Secretary General's question, there is an old but very valid adage about sunlight being the best disinfectant. To be sure, we need this heightened transparency across sectors and the entire online ecosystem if we are going to effectively combat this mortal enemy to social cohesion, democratic ideals, civil online discourse, and ultimately citizen safety. And we see the VTRF as being a significant landmark on the path to achieving this goal. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Commissioner, for those comments. Thank you very much for your call for action, and let us return the thanks to you and Australia for your leadership on these issues. It is impressive, and it's also a true source of inspiration. So thank you very much for setting the tone for today's discussion. I now turn to Mr. Robert Burley, who's Senior Director at the Centre for Community Engagement and Prevention of Violence, Public Safety Canada. Now, focusing on harmful content rather than illegal content online. Mr. Burley, how can we galvanize action in this space? What's the value of international multi-stakeholder approach for building a greater transparency? Mr. Burley, please.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary General, and to you and to the OECD team for giving Canada the opportunity to join this event. Before I answer your very good question, I just want to express congratulations to the OECD team and to all those who worked on the development of the VTRF. It has been a long process. We're grateful for the time and energy devoted by the broad group of experts and practitioners from industry, civil society, academia, and government to try and find common ground. It was not always easy, as your team knows well. But to answer your question, development of the framework does demonstrate the positive impact of multi-stakeholder collaboration for increasing the safety of online users. Listen, there are still many challenges to be sure, including how to better identify harmful activity online and its impacts, how to assess the effectiveness of prevention and countermeasures. These challenges will need the kind of multi-stakeholder approach that was part of creating the VTRF. Our government is committed to working with like-minded governments, industry, and stakeholders to build this evidence base. Our approach in Canada is, like for many other governments, is guided by the commitments under the Christchurch Call to Action. That includes supporting industry standards to ensure effective and transparent reporting. It includes enhancing transparency around community standards and terms of service. And it places multi-stakeholder collaboration at the core of these efforts. We are frankly excited about the VTRF as a new resource and tool. We see three specific benefits for having transparency metrics around terrorist and violent extremist content for all online platforms. First, the transparency metrics will improve the evidence base to better inform policy making, including on preventing and countering exploitation or misuse of online services. Second, the framework creates a mechanism to help improve the accountability of online platforms for increasing the safety of online users while respecting and protecting human rights and fundamental freedoms. And third, the framework can serve as a vehicle for reinforcing trust in the online environment and improving the efficiency and convenience of transparency reporting for social media platforms. Later this year, Canada will be establishing its own regulatory framework for online safety. Right now, we are engaging with experts and stakeholders with a wide range of perspectives on how online activity can generate harm and how to create a safe online space that protects all users. Our consultations include learning from other governments, such as Australia, and looking forward to meeting the ESafety Commissioner, Inman Grant, in Canada very shortly this month. As a proud Canadian, I'll conclude my answer by saying a few words in French. Au Canada, grâce à nos propres consultations avec les parties concernées, nous savons qu'il est parfois difficile de trouver un terrain d'entente. Mais comme a été le cas avec le processus de développement du VTRF, nous allons continuer de travailler avec d'autres gouvernements, l'industrie et la société civile dans le but de comprendre les enjeux et de s'assurer que l'Internet demeure une source d'innovation, de développement économique et une fondation des sociétés inclusives. Nous félicitons l'OCDE d'avoir créé le VTRF et d'avoir accru la transparence concernant l'utilisation des plateformes des médias sociaux. Je vous remercie. Félicitations.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Burley, and thank you also for these last comments in French. They're a very good segue to our next speaker, because our next speaker is actually from France, our good friend, Ambassador Henri Verdier. Henri, good to see you and welcome. Henri Verdier is France's ambassador for digital technologies, and I think, as everyone recognizes, France has been a long-time champion in efforts in the fight against TVEC. Ambassador Vergier, or I can't help to call you Henri. Henri, what are your views on how we can improve the evidence based on terrorist and violent extremist content online, as well, of course, as other types of harmful content while protecting human rights? So you have the floor.
Thank you. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. And yes, we have the privilege to have a very high-level interpretation. So I will speak French, as French diplomacy is supposed to do, and especially at the OECD. Alors, je passe en français. Merci beaucoup de ce beau travail, des perspectives qu'il dessine et de m'inviter à partager avec vous ce grand moment. Je voudrais tout d'abord souligner que ce que nous faisons est très important. Les terroristes, les contenus terroristes, les contenus violents, les appels à la haine ne sont pas seulement une sorte de pollution dans les réseaux sociaux qui arrive après l'acte terroriste. De notre point de vue, et vous savez que j'exerce avec la Nouvelle-Zélande le secrétariat du Christchurch Call, de notre point de vue, c'est une partie intégrante de l'acte terroriste. Le terroriste veut semer la terreur et l'impact médiatique, l'impact conversationnel de son acte est une partie intégrante de son acte. Il sème la terreur, il blesse les victimes, il recrute de nouveaux supporters. Donc en affrontant cette question, nous ne sommes pas seulement dans de la régulation des contenus, nous sommes dans la lutte contre le terrorisme lui-même, et c'est vraiment important. Deuxièmement, et je commence à répondre à la question, oui, nous croyons, la France, l'Europe et tous les amis de l'OCDE qui sont ici, que la transparence doit être au cœur de cette réponse. Pas seulement la transparence sur les contenus qui ont été retirés, pas seulement une transparence formelle, une culture de responsabilité, une culture de accountability. Et ça aussi, c'est tout à fait essentiel. Nous avons tous vu, parfois avec sidération, les débats qui entourent le rachat de Twitter par Elon Musk et les débats sur qui doit gouverner la place du village. Et notre ami, enfin Monsieur Musk, nous explique que pour garantir la neutralité et la démocratie, il faut qu'un milliardaire autocrate décide seul de ce que doit être l'espace civique. Ce n'est pas la vision de la France. L'espace civique, c'est l'espace de nos vies, de nos existences, de nos démocraties. C'est l'espace où se forge l'opinion. C'est l'espace de la concertation, de la polémique. C'est ça, la polémique. Et ça doit être un espace démocratique et donc gouverné par des principes, des valeurs, des débats, dans lesquels les citoyens et leurs représentants, que sont les États souverains, et le système multilatéral et le système multi-acteurs, aient toute leur place. Et ça commence par une réelle et solide culture de accountability, vous dites en anglais. Et c'est tout à fait essentiel. Et nous le savons bien, j'ai été moi-même entrepreneur, et peut-être plus difficile encore, j'ai été chargé de l'open data et de l'open government pour le gouvernement français. Nous savons bien que c'est difficile d'entrer profondément dans une culture de transparence. C'est facile de proclamer l'importance de la transparence, mais c'est difficile concrètement d'être celui qui décide de mettre un jeu de données en ligne. Et on a toujours un peu peur, même moi quand j'étais directeur de l'open data. Et c'est pourquoi des guides comme celui que nous avons préparé ensemble, comme le VTRF, même s'ils sont non contraignants, sont essentiels. Ils sont mûrs, ils sont débattus, ils représentent des bonnes pratiques, ils permettent de se comparer à d'autres, ils permettent de se rassurer, ils permettent de construire une solide transparence. Parce que, je l'ai dit souvent à de nombreuses entreprises, un rapport d'auto-évaluation relu par le service de communication, c'est un progrès, mais ça n'est pas un acte de transparence. Un acte de transparence, c'est aussi le partage de données brutes. En fait, un acte de transparence permet aux autres de construire un point de vue qui n'est pas le sien, et même de contester notre point de vue. Et pour ça, il faut des données brutes. Il faut des données d'ailleurs larges. Et on a commencé à en parler dans ce groupe de travail. Ce n'est pas seulement de savoir quels contenus ont été retirés ou comment on les a trouvés. C'est aussi de savoir s'il y a, par exemple, l'effectivité d'un canal d'appel pour contester un retrait, c'est aussi de savoir un petit peu les moyens qui sont mis en place. Est-ce qu'ils parlent bien toutes les langues ou est-ce qu'ils parlent que l'anglais américain? C'est aussi de savoir, parce que nous commençons collectivement à réfléchir tous à la radicalisation algorithmique, c'est aussi de savoir quels sont les contenus qui sont promus, est-ce qu'il y a une distorsion, est-ce qu'on arrive à se rapprocher d'une neutralité? Et tout ça, ça commence par des données brutes. En Europe, vous le savez, nous avons, il y a une semaine, approuvé le Digital Service Act. Donc, nous créons un cadre de redevabilité qui va s'améliorer d'année en année, puisque c'est un cadre de dialogue exigeant, mais de dialogue. Mais ça n'est que pour l'Europe, et je me réjouis profondément que sur une base d'engagement volontaire, on puisse faire ça bien au-delà de l'Europe. Je voudrais dire un dernier mot pour conclure sur le fait que certains l'ont déjà dit, y compris le secrétaire général. Bien sûr, il faut prêter une attention particulière aux tout petites entreprises pour deux raisons. La première, c'est que aujourd'hui, les grandes plateformes sont en train d'apprendre à prendre leurs responsabilités et les problèmes sont en tout cas, on voit le chemin de régulation. Et donc, la violence, la radicalité, l'extrémisme, la haine et parfois le terrorisme se réfugient dans des toutes petites plateformes plus périphériques donc, qui parfois sont vraiment des projets idéologiques qui n'ont même pas de réel business model et qui donc sont plus difficiles à engager dans un chemin de responsabilité. Et donc, il faudra qu'on fasse face à cette nouvelle situation. Et symétriquement, ne l'oublions jamais, toute grande entreprise commence petite. Une start-up, par définition, ça prend un risque d'innovation et ça cherche un équilibre et ça cherche un business model. Et pendant un temps, c'est fragile. C'est la définition même d'une start-up. Et donc, nos régulations ne doivent pas écraser les jeunes innovateurs. Mais peut-être je me permettrai de partager avec les petites comme avec les grandes entreprises. Précisément cette expérience que j'ai acquise dans le gouvernement quand je m'occupais d'open government. L'open government, l'open data, la culture d'ouverture, de responsabilité, ça peut être difficile, lourd, cher et douloureux si on veut tout contrôler. Et ça peut être au contraire un chemin de modernisation si on comprend qu'on doit entrer sereinement dans une culture de transparence. Y a pas de nous, par exemple, c'est un détail, mais maintenant, dès qu'on fait un nouveau site public en France, les statistiques de consultation du site sont en ligne et tout le monde peut les voir. Voilà, c'est par défaut. Et une fois que les développeurs ont compris ça leur coûte pas cher aux développeurs, c'est 3 lignes de code. Et en revanche, ça change la culture de l'organisation. Et mon plaidoyer de conclusion, c'est peut-être de dire, ça peut sembler paradoxal, mais j'ai envie de dire aux entreprises, les États ont fait de grands efforts depuis près de 15 ans pour entrer dans cette culture de plus grande ouverture, de plus grande redevabilité, de plus grande transparence et peut-être aussi de plus grande acceptation d'un regard critique sur ce que nous faisons. On a d'ailleurs découvert qu'on ne s'est jamais fait taper parce qu'on avait été transparent. En général, les gens vous sont reconnaissants et ils viennent vous voir pour vous proposer des améliorations, pas pour vous piéger. Et peut-être que les entreprises devraient regarder ce que les États essayent de faire depuis 15 ans en matière d'open government. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur l'ambassadeur. Merci, Henri, pour ces réflexions françaises, ces perspectives françaises. Et en français, comme vous avez dit correctement, nous avons 2 langues officielles ici à l'OCDE et ça, on peut essayer d'écouter toutes les 2 langues. And now, I think in English, I'm not 100% certain, but I guess in English, we turn to Ambassador Min, who is Korea's ambassador for science, technology, and innovation. But not only that, he's also formerly the chair of the OECD's Committee on Digital Economy Policy. This is the committee that spearheads our work on combating terrorist and violent extremist content online. So it's a real pleasure to have you with us, Ambassador. In your view, how could better transparency help improve online trust and internet safety while protecting human rights? Ambassador Min, I think you are muted.
Can you hear me now?
We hear you fine now. Thanks for being with us.
Sorry. Thank you, Deputy Secretary General Knutson. Yes, I will use English. And good afternoon, Good morning and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Before providing my view on your question, I would like to congratulate the OECD Secretariat and all the contributors to the OECD Voluntary Transparency Reporting Framework, VTRF, for building a critical platform to address terrorist and violent extremist contents online TVEC. The launch of VTRF has a special personal meaning to me because it was first discussed at the 2019 OECD Committee on Digital Economy Policy meeting while I was the chair of it. I still remember the passionate statements made by colleagues from Australia and New Zealand that we should introduce measures to address TVEC at the global level. In this respect, it is great to see the launch of VTRF after 3 years hard work of the Secretariat, led by Jeremy West, and many contributors from governments, industry, academia, and civil society. Since the beginning of the project, the Korean government has strongly supported it, and we will give our best efforts to collaborate with the Secretariat and other member states to expand the use of VTRF. Having said that, going back to the question, with the rapid growth of the use of the internet and the growing dependency on it in our social and economic activities, ensuring trust and safety online becomes critical. While the use of internet gives us enormous opportunities, including the expansion of freedom of expression by enabling us to reach out to literally almost all people living in the world, it also poses the risk to be used by malicious actors, as witnessed in 2019 at Christchurch. That is the reason G20 and the Christchurch call underscored need for online content sharing service providers to be more transparent and accountable with regard to TVEC. According to the OECD reports, the majority of top 50 online content sharing service providers ban the contents considered TVEC, but with different standards. In the meantime, it is also important that the content moderation efforts of online content sharing service providers should respect fundamental rights, including access to information, freedom of expression, privacy, and due process. Considering the ever-changing nature of internet contents, no single entity can take care of this issue, and it is essential to build a global multi-stakeholder cooperation platform to effectively address TVEC. In this context, following the two benchmark reports on how top 50 online content sharing service providers are addressing TVEC, the VTRF web portal launched today with the participation of governments, industry, academia, and civil society is a meaningful step forward to raise the capacity of global multi-stakeholder cooperation against the TVEC. Korea hoped that through the wide adoption of the VTRF, we could build more concrete and harmonious definitions on TVEC and raise capacity to counter TVEC across online content sharing service providers, including small ones. In particular, we hope that more consistent TVEC transparency reporting would enable to make better policy solutions against TVEC, both in the national and global level. Before closing my intervention, if I may provide feedback in my personal capacity, it seems to me that when there would be more adoptions of VTRF among online content sharing service providers, the voluntary participation model of VTRF could be also used in addressing the misinformation and disinformation problems and many other harmful information issues online. There are some similarities on the issues, and the online content sharing service providers' voluntary participation in the global multi-stakeholder platform can be a good model to address these issues. Once again, congratulations on the launch of VTRF. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for those remarks, and thank you all also for the remarkable work you've done in the past for the OECD. It's truly appreciated. Beyond governments, stakeholder groups represent an important constituency in this effort as well. Ms. Lichtenberg, you are the Executive Director of the Global Network Initiative, an NGO that's been defending freedoms online for, I think, more than 10 years. Based on your experience, how can we increase accountability from online platforms for improving internet safety while protecting freedom of expression and privacy?
Thank you, and good day, everyone. First, I would also like to thank the OECD for allowing us to join my esteemed colleagues for this discussion. And I would also like to acknowledge and recognize the 3 years of admirable effort and collaboration from the experts group and the OECD on the VTRF. In response to your question, Mr. Knutson, although there are many inputs that can help ensure accountability while protecting human rights, the essential ingredient is multi-stakeholder participation. You mentioned already my organization, the GNI, is a multi-stakeholder membership organization itself. We bring together ICT companies, NGOs, investors, and academics to collaborate around a shared commitment to freedom of expression and privacy. And that work is based on the GNI principles, which provide a framework for responsible company decision-making and multi-stakeholder collaboration in response to government orders on ICT companies that may restrict these rights. Importantly, for the purposes of accountability, I want to also note that the GNI companies are independently assessed on their implementation of these principles through a unique multi-stakeholder-led process. Transparency is core to this framework. GNI members commit to disclosing the laws, policies, and procedures that might require them to restrict content or share access to user data, and to provide notice to users as appropriate. GNI and its members also share learning and best practices on different tools for transparency with their users, including transparency reporting. In addition, GNI has worked to push governments to model good practices themselves, including by lifting restrictions on companies' own reporting, for example. In our work of reviewing global content regulation efforts, we have seen an increasing number of proposals featuring specific requirements for transparency around companies' policies and practices, ranging from reporting requirements to data sharing, and featuring different approaches to corresponding enforcement and oversight. And GNI is encouraged by regulatory approaches centered on articulating standards for appropriate content moderation based on traditional rule of law concepts, such as transparency, non-discrimination, due process, and remedy for impacted users. We believe that these requirements provide important clarity for users and are essential steps to mitigate the potential for over-removal and self-censorship. At the same time, we also believe that it is important to ensure that these efforts do not create an unnecessarily fragmented landscape of competing requirements or result in rules that reduce transparency to a facile reporting exercise. Recognizing this, GNI has joined the OECD and a group of global experts striving to identify the appropriate norms and regulatory and co-regulatory approaches to meaningful digital transparency. One essential ingredient for making such efforts work is to ensure broad participation and creative approaches. And here I want to tip my hat to the OECD for the multi-stakeholder approach that you took to the transparency reporting framework. True progress requires candid conversations about the potential barriers to transparency, whether these are legal or technology or technical challenges, privacy and security risks, or competition concerns, among other considerations. And the voluntary transparency reporting framework brought new perspectives and understandings for the participants, even if there is more work to be done. Recognizing this need, earlier this year, GNI announced the launch of the Action Coalition on Meaningful Transparency under the auspices of the Danish Tech for a Democracy initiative. It aims to identify and build connections and collaboration between actors working on a wide range of interconnected transparency initiatives, including those focused on company transparency reporting and government laws that encourage or restrict transparency. The Action Coalition aims to bring together a wide range of stakeholders to work together on digital transparency in several ways, including, for example, by clarifying relevant definitions and identifying opportunities for alignment and coordination. The coalition is led by a steering group of civil society organizations, of which GNI is a member too, and we are currently reaching out to potential participants in the broader coalition. And so I would also like to use this opportunity to encourage all interested stakeholders to express interest in joining. Ultimately, we recognize that achieving meaningful digital transparency is a difficult and multifaceted endeavor, requiring dynamic collaborative approaches. Whether it's understanding the threats facing different types of platforms firsthand, adopting requirements to changing technologies, or ensuring users sufficiently understand the policies and procedures governing their use of platforms, the most effective approaches to regulating for better transparency and accountability in this space will require ongoing stakeholder dialogue and collaboration. To conclude, we hope that GNI can continue to play a central role in coordinating among efforts like the Action Coalition and the VTRF to model such approaches moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lichtenberg, for this perspective. We certainly agree that the multi-stakeholder perspective is very, very important, lies at the heart of this. Finally, let me turn to Vice President of Trust and Safety of the company Discord, Mr. Redgrave. I'd like to congratulate Discord on behalf of the OECD for actually being the first online platform to use the VTRF and to have submitted the first ever transparency report through the portal. I think it was submitted just a couple of days ago. Mr. Redgrave, what do you see as the main challenges that you encounter as an online content sharing service for transparency reporting on TVEC and other types of online harmful content? And in your view, how can we decrease the reporting burden on industry while at the same time improving trust online?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Deputy Secretary General Knutson. And thanks for those kind words. We're very excited to be the first industry reporter. It's definitely in our DNA to get ahead of these things and to be a leader when it comes to transparency. I'm honored to share with this esteemed group thoughts on transparency reporting in the context of terrorist and violent extremism content online. In my role as VP of Trust and Safety at Discord, I'm responsible for safety across our service, including our efforts to combat violent extremism. Let me start by saying thanks and congratulations in return to the OECD and the expert group who delivered the VTRF. We're really proud to participate in this effort by transparently sharing facts and figures about Discord's efforts in combating violent extremism. First, I think it'd be helpful for me to provide some context about Discord. Discord is a voice, video, and text chat app that's used by more than 100 million people ages 13 and older to talk and hang out with their communities and friends. Our mission at Discord is to enable people to find belonging. Now, we recognize that providing safe experiences on our service enables people to find that belonging. That is why it is one of Discord's most important priorities and investments as a company. Our effort to make Discord safe for all users is staffed by 15% of employees at Discord. Our engineering, machine learning, data, and product teams work with safety principles in mind when designing and building products. Our policy team takes a nuanced and sophisticated approach to developing our community guidelines. Our community moderation team trains and empowers moderators on our service to keep their communities safe and healthy. And last, and certainly not least, our trust and safety team works with cutting-edge technology to detect and respond to abuse, both proactively and based on user reports. Now, let me address our specific efforts on violent extremism. We've been paying close attention to violent extremist groups and movements ever since we learned how the organizers of the 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, utilized Discord to plan their hateful activities. Since then, we have invested heavily in our moderation efforts to ensure that something like that would never happen again. Our trust and safety team splits their time between responding to user reports and proactively detecting and removing servers and users engaging in high harm activities, such as violent extremism. Proactively removing violent extremism from our platform is critical, and we spend significant resources to do so, including but not limited to having a team dedicated to these efforts. During the second half of 2021, we are really proud to report that nearly half of servers removed for violent extremism were done so proactively before a user ever had to report it to us. In addition to our internal team efforts, we've enhanced our capabilities by collaborating with international organizations such as GIFCT, the EU Internet Forum, and Tech Against Terrorism. Thanks to these partnerships, we've made tremendous progress in our tooling, policy, and subject matter expertise to ensure that violent extremism does not have a home on Discord. These important partnerships help us to react swiftly in the case of real-life terrorist events and collaborate effectively with other companies and government. We believe that a collective effort is the only way forward when it comes to combating violent extremism and other types of high harm activities, such as child sex abuse material. And we really look forward to engaging in more industry collaboration. Our capabilities to detect and remove violent extremism were put to the test in 2021 during the terrifying storming of the United States Capitol. In the weeks before the event, our team of counter-extremism experts began monitoring the emerging situation and proactively removed servers involved in discussing and organizing the event in December of 2020. In total, our team removed 27 servers and 857 accounts the day of January 6, 2021. Now, let me finally get to your question. Transparency in our efforts is paramount to ensure that our users around the world understand the enormous effort that goes into making Discord a safer place. Transparency also provides precious insights to policymakers, which in turn helps them to draft better legislation. Regulators around the world are rightly working hard to identify ways to foster the fight against terrorism in the online space. And we recognize that regulatory requirements on transparency reporting are going to be introduced in various jurisdictions. As Discord, we welcome such efforts. However, we believe that policymakers around the world should communicate effectively amongst themselves to ensure that requirements are as harmonized as possible at a global level. Fragmentation of requirements substantially increases the burden on companies to report. This is particularly important for a medium-sized company such as Discord, which does not have the same means as the biggest tech companies in the world, such as Facebook or Google. Keeping transparency reporting obligations as feasible as possible for innovative companies, big and small, will ensure that transparency is not seen as a burden, but rather as a positive way to contribute to the fight against terrorism. Therefore, we greatly value multi-stakeholder initiatives such as the VTRF of the OECD, which have the potential to simplify transparency efforts at a global scale, facilitate the sharing of information between governments, and ultimately to contribute to a safer online environment. Once again, I want to thank you for this effort and reiterate our commitment to collaborate with the OECD and other institutions to ensure transparency around our efforts against terrorist content. I also would invite you to read our latest transparency report to learn more about our efforts in this space. I really look forward to a productive discussion. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup to you. Really interesting to get that company perspective on what we do and learn about your lessons from the raid on Capitol. Thank you so much for that. We have a little bit of extra time, so I thought I'd turn back to some of the panelists for a few more questions and maybe some briefer answers this time. I think it would be interesting to have your take or your elaborations on what the future of multi-stakeholder governance in this area would be like. I don't know if I could perhaps go back to you, Commissioner Inman-Grant, or you, Robert Burley, to just briefly perhaps pick your brains on how you see the future of governance in this area.
Well, listen, I think we really do have to stay the course on engagement with multi-stakeholder working groups. I think we've been witnessing over the past couple of years almost industry slipstreaming out of these multi-stakeholder groups, and really predominantly focusing on things like GiveCT, the Technology Coalition, and other issues that are very, very industry-led and not so multi-stakeholder. And I think you could say the same thing about governments. I agree 100% with John that countries around the world need to be working together so we don't create a regulatory splinter net of regulations that are impossible for companies to comply with. But we need to really put a focus on this stakeholder engagement. So we don't actually have polarities. Again, having the NGO sector, civil society, academia also contributing, I think has added a whole additional element of richness in data to this particular process as well.
Robert Burley, can I ask for your take on this as well?
Indeed, and I think your question flows very nicely from John's comments coming from Discord, and I think his point about needing to have less fragmentation and is a very good one. It underlines the importance of the OECD's work on the VTRF. I think that the GiveCT is another forum that can bring a lot of consistency because that's an organization that is a bridge between private enterprise, the social media companies, and governments. Canada is one of 7 governments that sits on the GiveCT's Independent Advisory Council. And that organization, and for those who are listening and don't know the GiveCT, it is the Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism, currently made up of 18 companies, including Discord. GiveCT is currently on a campaign to increase its membership globally, not just the larger companies, but also smaller ones, targeting not just English language companies, but those that are using other languages. We know that in parts of the world that there are many companies operating in languages other than English. And so we are applauding GiveCT's efforts in this domain to increase its membership. And one of the projects of the GiveCT, and I'm sounding like a champion for the group, but it really is an independent group led by the major companies. The campaign is to develop common definitions, standards, terms of service for all companies, big and small, to adhere to, with the support and with integration with government policies. So to me, it's an excellent example of reducing the fragmentation that John was speaking about, and a multi-stakeholder approach, Deputy Secretary General. Thank you.
Thank you so much, both, for that. Let me turn to Ambassador Verdier. Henri, of course, you're welcome to also contribute on that same issue of the future of governance. But I'm also tempted to ask you, of all people, that if you could have a perfect base of evidence for one type of harmful or illegal content, what type of content would you choose and why?
Merci. Je vais essayer d'être très court, mais effectivement, je voudrais contester légèrement le consensus de la question précédente pour partager avec vous ma conviction profonde que ce que nous devons protéger à toute force, c'est l'unité d'Internet. Et ce que nous devons combattre de toutes nos forces, c'est la fragmentation d'Internet. Internet, c'est les couches profondes. C'est le protocole TCP/IP, c'est les câbles, c'est ce qui permet toute cette innovation. Internet, ça obéit à des principes. C'est décentralisé, c'est neutre, libre, ouvert. Les entreprises qui se sont construites sur Internet, ça n'est pas Internet. Et je serais très heureux si Discord, puisque vous nous faites le plaisir d'être là, ou Facebook ou Google, avait un marché unifié, mais ça n'est pas ma priorité première. Et nous avons le droit, comme États souverains, qui sont des démocraties, d'écouter aussi la volonté du peuple souverain. Et si certains pays veulent défendre la vie privée, par exemple, et d'autres veulent interdire la parole antisémite, c'est le cas pour la France sur ces deux exemples, nous sommes fondés à le faire. Donc je mets une petite nuance entre l'impératif de défendre l'unité d'Internet qui est menacée de nos jours, et peut-être plus encore après l'Ukraine, et l'utilité qu'il y aurait à proposer aux entreprises un cadre unifié qui est souhaitable, mais qui n'est pas un impératif catégorique. Et pour moi, ceci est très important de s'en souvenir. Et effectivement, tout à l'heure, j'ai parlé d'open government, j'ai parlé de commun, j'ai parlé de nouvel espace civique. À mon avis, si la gouvernance de ces entreprises doit s'ouvrir un peu, c'est plutôt parce que, en fait, les entreprises et les contributeurs et le sous-jacent qui est Internet, de facto, nous construisons le nouveau civic space, le nouvel espace civique. Et probablement, ça devrait ressortir d'une gouvernance un peu élargie, comme un commun. Mais ce n'est pas tout à fait sur les mêmes fondements. Ensuite, si aujourd'hui j'avais une baguette magique pour obtenir la transparence maximale, personnellement, je pense que ce qui nous manque le plus, ce sont les travaux académiques de qualité sur comment se forge comment se polarise l'opinion, comment se radicalisent des petits groupes, comment des décisions qui ne sont pas malveillantes, qui sont orientées par des considérations business, peuvent éventuellement conduire au 6 janvier. Et donc, j'aurais envie de dire, ouvrez sereinement, si nécessaire, dans des cadres sécurisés, les données dont a besoin la recherche. Et bien sûr, respecter la liberté de la recherche. J'ai de nombreux exemples, aucun ne concerne Discord, où les entreprises ont partagé des données avec les chercheurs, mais on demandait aux chercheurs de ne pas publier tous leurs résultats, ou on menaçait de refermer les données si certains travaux étaient conduits. Ça, c'est contradictoire avec l'essence même de la recherche publique. Et nous avons tous besoin, comme civilisation, de comprendre dans quel système médiatique et cognitif et social nous sommes entrés. Merci.
Merci Henri pour ça, aussi pour partager votre perspective en ce qui concerne un espace civique ouvert, comme vous avez dit. Merci beaucoup. Let me turn to Ambassador Wong Ki-min again. We talked about how the VTRF could be used, I mean, not only for the transparency on TVEC, but also for transparency with respect to other illegal and harmful content in the future. Could you perhaps briefly share a little bit about how Korea is responding to illegal, harmful content online?
Yes, actually, when you look at this issue, it's not just Korea, but we actually try to learn from the other countries' cases, and we actually try to listen OECD's voice on this matter, because this matter is in nature the global matter. Any single country cannot address that issue. So what we try to do is to find out the best practice in the world and try to actually cooperate with other countries to effectively support this kind of VTRF type system in Korea. But what I would like to address here is, when you look at this VTRF, you can intuitively see the kind of the future advancement of this system in other aspects, such as dealing with misinformation and disinformation and child abuse online, all those kind of things. Because when you look at all the participants in this program, they are also the kind of the stakeholders in those issues. So if we could build a kind of sustainable global multi-stakeholder platform on this thing, we could actually expand the kind of usage of this program on other important issues. That I'm strongly looking forward to see that kind of development in this platform. So hopefully Korea can contribute on that aspect together with other member states and other multi-stakeholders, just like the civil society and the industry together.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'm sure Korea can contribute a lot here, as you have done in the past. Let me perhaps raise another issue with Ms. Lichtenberg and Mr. Redgrave. A kind of dilemma, perhaps, because we've seen increasingly that terrorists and violent extremists are turning to some of the smaller online platforms for spreading their content. How can we get greater transparency from these smaller platforms without imposing on them what would then be a disproportionate burden in terms that could deter, entry, competition, and innovation, given that these are smaller players? Do you have any perspectives on that? If I could start with you, Ms. Lichtenberg.
Thank you. Yes, let me first also take the opportunity to underscore also what has been said in answer to the first question, and was also highlighted by Ms. Innen, is the importance of a strong civil society participation in all these multi-stakeholder initiatives addressing this issue to really ensure a meaningful multi-stakeholder dialogue. And then to come back to this question, I think also here it is important to work together and make sure that also smaller companies can participate in these initiatives so that they can also highlight their specific issues and challenges. And in the past, there have also been initiatives that also the bigger companies actually helped smaller companies to address these issues together, also with further participation from other stakeholders. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Redgrave.
Absolutely, thank you. If I may, I'd love to address the previous two questions as well.
You're welcome.
So let me just quickly hit those, and then I'll get to the question about smaller platforms and the attack vectors there. So in the future of multi-stakeholder, I would say that it's really important for us to keep channels of communication open between industry, civil society, and government. I think that the reporting every 6 months is going to be fantastic as in terms of a cadence, but it would be a disservice to all of the work that's been done to not continue to have the channels of communication be open and the flow of information to be open. And then with respect to Ambassador Verdier's comment, it is certainly true that every country has the right to legislate. Divergence is going to be normal as the course of legislature continues, but we really appreciate these efforts, such as the one that's being undertaken by the OECD, because these type of fora can bring harmonization on certain issues on which everybody agrees, such as transparency. Additionally, I think it's really important that we do continue to see academic efforts and research be published. As someone who's worked with academics for a big part of my career, I know how important that publishing is to companies to increase transparency and also to really help companies unearth problematic content that maybe we're not even aware of at the time. So I agree with his comment that encouraging academia and allowing for the publishing of information from academia is critical. Now, onto your question, I think that the incentive structure around these smaller companies is part of the challenge for them. As someone who has started 2 different startups in my career and have been a small company, although not one subject to needing transparency reporting, I've worked with those companies and I've seen the challenges that they face. And there is a constant tension between how do we grow our business and how do we keep our users safe? So that's the first tension that needs to be overcome. And Commissioner Inman Grant has done wonderful work through the ESafety office to help companies think about safety by design and other principles that can be applied at the earliest stages of companies. Additionally, I think that there is technology, of course, that would really help these companies, because as a small startup, you're not focused on transparency necessarily. You're just focused on what do I even do to keep my users safe? And so industry associations such as GIFCT are really valuable. I think transparency is kind of an afterthought. And so how do we as a collective allow people to, one, get the technology that they need and the transparency and insight that they need to keep their users safe, and then to incorporate them into the larger collective in terms of driving transparency amongst those small companies. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was actually 3 answers to 3 questions in 3 minutes. So thank you for your speed there and efficiency and brevity. No, really, thank you all on this panel for a highly insightful discussion. I hope everyone enjoyed it. I certainly did and learned a lot. Before we conclude, we have, I think, one more insightful person we need to hear from. This would not be complete if we didn't hear from our very own Andrew Wyckoff, who's the director here at the OECD for Science, Technology, and Innovation. So Andy, please provide us with your concluding thoughts.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary General. And for me, this is about as good as it gets at the OECD. I really welcome all of the participants, the Secretary General, yourself, distinguished panelists in the audience, joining us today to kind of look at what can happen when interested parties get together through the multi-stakeholder international process that we host here at the OECD. I won't pretend it's been easy. I was there at Boston and heard Julie's inspiring keynote address, and I've been following this project closely ever since. And I know it's been hard, but that's because it's a complex issue. And I just want to thank all the participants, particularly that expert group that met many, many, many times over the last 2 years to put this together. I think it's a great start. And I just want to say thank you for the multi-stakeholder process that governments, civil society, business coming together. Now, as has been said, and Ambassador Min, who's the ex-chair and a former colleague of mine, can read my mind. He knows we've got further work to do. And so this is the beginning. VTRF 1.0 marks the beginning of what's a pilot. We're going to learn from this. We're going to refine it. It's going to come back better. But also, it was always the idea from the start that we would do a VTRF 2.0 that went deeper and asked more questions for those platforms that have the wherewithal to answer those questions. And as has been said, we're doing more than just this transparency framework. Ambassador Vadier has inspired me with some of the work he does on terms of service. We're doing that here on this one specific issue where we've issued a number of reports tracking how terms of service for the big content sharing platforms have evolved over time. And with this year's edition, we made an important improvement. For this year's report, for the first time, we cover not only the global top 50 platforms in general, but also the 50 that are most widely used specifically for the purpose of sharing TVEC. And as has been said again by Ambassador Min and my Secretary General, VTRF is a flexible and expandable framework. We think it provides a proof of concept and a prototype, a model that can be used potentially in other areas, including child sexual abuse material, mis and disinformation, online fraud, and so forth. But let me just end by saying thanks again to all of you for your contributions for this first down payment on VTRF. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andy. And again, thanks all for being with us today. I think the only thing that's left for me to say is that I'll invite you all to visit the actual VTRF portal. You can have a look for yourselves. You can find further information. And of course, you can also submit and view transparency reports. I think the portal's link has been added now to the chat, and you should also be able to see the URL on your screens right now. Yeah, I see it. As I mentioned earlier, Discord is the first service to have submitted a transparency report, but we hope that also Meta, formerly Facebook, will be submitting in the near future. They've said, or they've indicated that they will do that. So that meant by saying that together we can build the evidence base to drive greater accountability of the platform ecosystem, with the aim of course, ultimately reducing the prevalence and impact of terrorist and violent extremist content online. So I thank you all again. I wish you a good afternoon. Bye-bye.